Page 2 now, the Donald Sterling fiasco. Here is the latest. A couple of things. Donald's wife, Shelley, wants to keep the team, but she is distancing herself from her husband right now, and her attorneys are discussing the options with the NBA. Meantime, a new audio tape purportedly of Donald has surfaced. It's a little suspicious as it offers an explanation of sorts of the first explosive recording. Radar Online released the tape. On it, Sterling is explaining to someone that he's not a racist.
And you're talking to her privately. You don't think anybody's there. You may say anything in the world. What difference does it make? Then if the girl tapes it and releases it, my God, it's awful. You know, Joel, all the ministers, well, careful. Who thinks anybody's going to tape something? What the hell? I'm talking to a girl. The girl's black. I like her. I'm jealous that she's with other black guys. I want her. So what the hell can I, in private, tell her? You know, I don't want you to be with anybody. I mean, am I a person? Do I have any freedom of speech?
Now, the other team owners in the NBA will vote possibly this month on whether Donald Sterling should be forced to sell his share of the team. Meantime, the woman who started all this when she illegally recorded Sterling is being investigated right now for extortion against Sterling. So how much legally messier can the whole Donald Sterling affair get? Joining me now, attorney and legal analyst Vikas Bajaj. Vic, well, let's start with the NBA, okay?
Sure.
They come out, Adam Silver comes out and says, hey, Donald Sterling, you can't be a part of the NBA anymore, and we are going to force you to sell the team. But now we look at all the situation that's developing not only with the Sterlings, but in the state of California. It may not be that easy.
Oh, that's correct. Absolutely. You know, when I first heard the story and I listened to the recordings and read the transcripts or the purported transcripts of the purported recording, you know, I was taken aback. Handling a lot of cases myself where my clients may be looking at extortion charges, that's the first thing that popped in my mind. How is this lady allowed to use a recording in the state of California, which is a state that requires the consent of both parties to a recording being actually effectuated? How is she allowed to use that as the basis of proliferation in the public eye of a recording that should have been done in private? That's a criminal act.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a client who had a surreptitious recording of a spouse, you know, even in their own home, you would say, hey, we're not going to admit that as evidence, right?
Well, you can't. Number one, you cannot admit that in evidence. The eavesdropping statute in the state of California is very similar to the federal statute in that there are exceptions. In this case, if she felt she was being extorted or there was a threat on her life or liberty, yes, she could record, but clearly the quality and character of the recording does not support that exception to the eavesdropping statute.
Okay, so we have the district attorney in Los Angeles possibly looking into this extortion situation. Do you think, because of the politically charged nature of this case, the racially charged nature of this case, that the DA will have the guts to go after her, or will they just kind of let this one fade away?
I don't know if it's a question of the racial charge in this case, in this circumstance. I think it's more of a real introspective look at what the statute requires. Now, extortion requires a threat to do something in exchange for property. The question is, if you're representing this young lady, which demand for what property did she actually make? I don't think she's made a demand for property. Of course, Sterling's wife has made a demand for return of property, but this young lady has not demanded property in exchange for proliferation to the public eye and ear. I don't think an extortion charge would fly. I do think, however, a misdemeanor eavesdropping statute violation would fly because Mr. Sterling did not agree or consent to his recording.
Okay, so this brings us now to the Stiviano v. Sterling case, and that is Mrs. Sterling is suing the girlfriend to get all of these gifts back, including, I think, a Ferrari and a couple of Bentleys and possibly a condo. For the life of me, I still haven't figured out, what's your opinion on this? Why did she, we're assuming that she released the original audio recording, right? If we stipulate that, why do you suppose that hit the public the way it did? Was it part of her effort to maybe make Donald capitulate and have Shelley back down? What's the whole motivation here?
Well, when we look at this sort of in a law school examination and we have the pros and cons and what may be the impetus for actions, that's a different kind of calculation. Here we have emotions. Whether this young lady is admitting that it was anything more than a platonic relationship or not, we clearly have Mr. Sterling having affection and attraction towards this young lady. We can't really know what the reason was for her to proliferate this recording. It may be to spite Mrs. Sterling because she's obviously being sued for, the cars that you had mentioned, but don't forget the Range Rover. That may be the most comfortable and important car to mention. But, we're talking millions of dollars of community property that was given to this young lady. So maybe the proliferation of the recording was more of, you're trying to make my life difficult, make me look like a gold digger, so to speak. I'm going to hurt you in the press also. I'd be hard-pressed to believe that she knew these types of consequences would come about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, now, speaking of community property in the state of California, this National Basketball Association franchise is community property. These two have been married for many, many years. They're co-owners, but they also own it in a trust. So the NBA coming out and saying, hey, we're going to force Donald Sterling to sell it, that's one thing. But this is owned by a family. So do you see problems with that?
Well, I wouldn't say it's owned by a family. It's owned by a trust, and that kind of takes us out of the familial framework of it. It's no different than if you and I owned a basketball team together and I said something that was disparaging. Does that mean that you're kicked out of your interest in it also just because we have a relationship where we own 50% in the same trust? I think the answer is clearly no. I think the real basis, in fact, here is that, yes, they are married. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling are legally married. But does that end the query? Absolutely not. They are members of the same trust. Right. The fact that they're my husband and wife is, frankly, completely irrelevant.
And if they start a divorce proceeding, things get even more complicated, I would imagine.
And probably well advised to have Mrs. Sterling not go down that road right now. That would just unduly complicate the issue. She has strong foundation. She's a 50% owner in a trust of an entity that's now worth, more than $500 million. Yeah. So I think it's much simpler and much more effective for her to keep her stance where it is.
And she says she wants to keep the team. Vic, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, the people behind the al-Qaeda group Boko Haram in Nigeria as the Daily Ledger continues.